Maiquis Hagaroyo, Nuk Kara Romero Niega, Nuk Patsat, Nuk Papao, Tauk Huivanius. Hello everyone, my name is Kara Romero. I'm so honored to be here. I just wanted to take a moment to make a land acknowledgement of the first peoples from this area. And when I went to do that research, there were a lot, so if there are any descendants here, thank you for welcoming us all to your land to gather. The Ka, the Osage, the Otos, the Missouri, the Kickapoo, and the Potawatomi. My name is Kara Romero, and I was born in Inglewood. We moved to the Chemehuevi Valley Indian Reservation in 1979. Let me figure out how this works. This is my great-grandmother and my grandmother. This was the family that I grew up in. The matriarchs of my family are my grandmother, and my dad's sister, my Aunt Lillian. As Bruce mentioned, I did about 10 years in Houston, Texas, where I was at the University of Houston, and I was a cultural anthropology major. Having grown up on the reservation, it was very interesting to me to be a cultural anthropology, and particularly in Native studies. Everything was taught in past tense. Everything was as if we didn't exist anymore. It became very apparent to me at the same time I was taking black and white photography that I wanted to tell a modern documentary story about how Native Americans are still here and that we're thriving and that we have a completely modern context. And so I set out to be a black and white photographer. I ended up continuing on in school when everything switched over to digital around 2002, 2003. That was a strange experience for me, but I'm very thankful for it now. I ended up going to school and getting a degree in science, an applied science degree in photography technology. And what you see in my images is kind of a mesh of that formal training on film, black and white, long hours in the dark room, and then digital, Photoshop, photo illustration. I shoot all digital now and work in the digital dark room. A little bit about where I'm from. I am from the Mojave Desert. It's where my bones are from. It's where I grew up, the land of the Choyas, of the Joshua Tree, of the Great Big Washes. And my tribe, the Chemehuevi, are known for basket weaving. So if you're to see a Chemehuevi artist in any museum, mostly besides myself, you will see some of the most beautiful baskets of all of the Great Basin basket weavers come from Chemehuevi. So I'd like to go ahead and start talking about some of my most recent work. I think one of the things that I'm most known for are my work with women. It is something that emerged as a strength for me early on. I think as artists, all of us tend to work in kind of an autobiographical sense of what we know, right? We write about what we know, we photograph what we know, we make art about what we know. And I'm from a tribe that is matriarchal. We have, our creator is a feminine woman, great ocean woman. We have equality in our governance. So all that to say, we are tough ladies where I'm from. The second part of that image was, or that text slide was decolonizing self-image through matriarchy. One of the other reasons that I really love to work with women. Her name is Arla. I'm often looking at how we do not see ourselves represented in the media, where our image is missing. This one is Jenna. I name my images after the person that is in them. So as opposed to going to many museum shows where you'll see Hopi Maiden or Chemehuevi woman or Navajo woman, these are named after the women that they are. So her name is Jenna, and that's to give agency to the woman's portrait that I'm taking. Oftentimes the content is representative of something larger, but to really ground the viewer in the idea that this is about the individual's identity as well. So these are editorial. The next set of images are part of an ongoing series called First American Girls. They are made to counter the underrepresentation of the diversity of Native American women. Through my family experience, we have a toy collection in our house. My husband comes from a long line of doll collectors. We have a 15-year-old daughter, and it became very apparent to me when she was young that there was really nothing representative of the diversity of Native American women. You often see in the truck stop things with, just ridiculous regalia, buckskin and pony beads. They're all quite disappointing when you really know all the diversity of our different tribes and our regalia. So I set out with one that's a little bit further along. This was the first one to own the stereotype of a Native American doll, a powwow princess. This is what a real powwow princess looks like. Her name is Wakia. She's Kiowa Comanche. It took 5 family members over a year to make her regalia. The images are very large, so you're able to spend time with them and see all of the high fashion of the different tribes. Going back, this one is Naomi. This is Naomi Whitehorse. Her mother is a celebrated regalia maker in California. They're Northern Chumash. They're from the land of San Luis Obispo on the central coast of California. We created these life-size doll box, and what that allowed us to do is to celebrate the different vernaculars of all the different tribes. So when we see different patterns represented, we know that vernacular represents different tribal peoples. The black and white design and the hot pink, it kind of sets you in a modern context. You kind of know that this is a California girl, but to go one step further and say that this is a first American California girl. The black and white design is found in modern street couture of California Native Americans. It represents the pine cone design, which you can also see the pine cones on the pedestal in the photograph. It's to elevate the status of the Bristol pine cones, which are the center of cultural universe. Her necklaces are made from pine nuts that are strung along with the shells, and as any doll would have their accessories or their most important accoutrements, each of the first American girls has cultural items that I collaborate with the mothers, sometimes the grandmothers, to show the different cultural items that are important to those specific women and tribes. This one is Julia. I often work with my friends and family. Julia is my niece. She's from Cochiti Pueblo. So on her box, you have a black and white vernacular of the Cochiti pottery design painted in the off-white and black. That represents the wild spinach from their area, the red chili, the blue corn on the string tied in a special way. It comes from her grandmother's Cochiti garden, and great-grandpa's drum up in the corner. The items down in the corner, the baskets that she's holding, all come from Grandma's house. This is Julia and Jocelyn, her daughter. So one of the other things that I was really interested in as a young Native American photographer is I've always loved figurative art. Found in world cultures everywhere. We do not have it in Native American art collections. Very rarely do we see ourselves in the nude form. And I began to examine that, and to me it expressed that we had been othered, that we were deemed inappropriate when our bodies were not covered. And there's a long history that goes along with that. But to have a woman behind the camera, you're able to counter the narrative of white male gaze. And so the next 2 images were my first 2 in an ongoing series of figuratives. This is Ka. Ka comes from a dynasty of Pueblo potters in Santa Clara, Pueblo. The inspiration for this piece came from an anecdote that was written about my husband, who is a potter. And it was about Clay Woman, and Clay Woman is a deity of the clay. She's warm and inviting and found the world over. But when you go to fire her, she's very temperamental and unpredictable, and no man can ever master her. I wanted to show how the spirit of Clay Woman had been passed down to Ka through thousands of years. In order to capture that catalyst moment in firing pottery, we captured her hair in motion at 1/8,000th of a second. And I, in Photoshop, overlaid a second photograph of a Mesa Verde vessel, which goes back thousands of years to our common ancestry of Anasazi, our ancestral Puebloan, again, to show how the spirit of Clay Lady had been passed down to her through thousands of years. I think it's important for viewers to understand that my female figuratives are meant to be supernatural and otherworldly, to show the power of being life givers. This one gives the viewer a relationship to what it's like to live on the shoreline of the Colorado River. This was taken before sunrise in my dad's backyard of my niece Veda. This one is Thai. She is Dene or Navajo. They're used interchangeably, but they prefer Dene. When I wanted to take Thai's portrait, a lot of times there's an interview process. We wanted to talk about what folklore and what things were important to her as a Dene woman. She wanted to talk about white shell woman. Being from California, I realized that the Dene peoples got their shells from California peoples. And so I went to my dear friend Leah, and I said, Leah, do you have any Olivella shells? They're a very rare white shell that are found on the central coast of Central California and Southern California. And she said, yes, actually, I've been saving them for 10 years. So we sat for 5 days, and we cleaned shells, and we strung them around Thai's neck. And it became representative of recreating the bond between Southern California Native women and the women of the Southwest through shells. This is a reclamation of traditional clothing. This is the traditional skirt of the Chemehuevi peoples. However, post-colonial dress is we are covered in calico from neck to ankle to wrist. So it is a colonial influence that we must cover our bodies. This one was actually borrowed from our museum, and we went to a sacred vein of white clay called Chalk Cliffs in Chemehuevi. This is part of a series called Sisterhood is Sacred. And this was part of an online magazine. If you don't subscribe or follow them on Instagram, it's the Indigenous Goddess Gang. This one is called Bring Her Home, and it was part of a show, a response by many artists who are working to bring awareness to the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls that experience a rate of violence 10 times higher than the national average. Murder is the third leading cause of death of Native American women, and it's because of jurisdictional problems that we have on our reservations and a lack of resources that we go uninvestigated by other authorities. This is our daughter, Cricket. So one of the things that is very important to Indigenous peoples is our landscape, and we are ontologically tied to our landscape, inseparable from our landscape. We do not see ourselves as separate from the rocks, from the land around us, from the animals, from the water. I was asked to be a part of the Desert X exhibition out in Coachella Valley. It was 25 artists that were asked to come and respond to the landscape of Coachella Valley. I was the only Indigenous person that was invited to be one of the 25 artists, which was a responsibility that I took very seriously, to represent a large indigenous population over all of Southern California. It meant representing Cahuilla peoples, Serrano peoples, Mojave peoples, Chemehuevi peoples. We did a billboard takeover on the Gene Autry Trail, which is the highway between Palm Springs and LA. One of the things that I wanted to advertise were that indigenous peoples are still very much alive in Southern California. And the way I decided to do that was I borrowed 4 boys from my reservation, which is about 100 miles from this billboard location. I'm basically their auntie, and I grew up babysitting their parents. And the boys are representative of themselves, but they are also representative of something bigger than themselves. And in response to the landscape, I imagined what it might be like if our ancestors or our spirit beings of the land might come back and respond to the landscape for us. So we dressed the 4 boys old way. And again, they represent something bigger than themselves, so time travelers, if you will, spirit beings. But they also represent these 4 little boys from the reservation. This is Kiani. This one is called Evolvers. Again, speaking to the spirit of the landscape, this one is called Evolvers. It's playful, and of course we all embrace the idea of solar energy in Southern California. But it's also a response to race, class, and colonization when it comes to infrastructure. I thought if our ancestors were to come back to the landscape in a great big wash, which are once the tide pools of our desert, they might run away from these big windmills like in a sci-fi poster. This is Indian Canyon, the mouth to a sacred site for the Agua Caliente Indians of Palm Springs. This one is called Spirits of Siwabaats. This one is called No Wall and is a response to the violent wall proposed on the southern border. Many of us in the Southwest have ancestry that descends from both sides of the colonial border. I thought our spirit beings might come and respond to the political landscape as well. This one was very special for me to put up on a billboard because I wanted all of our immigrant and migrant workers there in Coachella Valley, of which there are very many, to know that they are loved. This is the 17-mile road into our reservation. This one is called Water Memories. These were a response to tribal peoples that were either historically, presently, or in the future affected by flooding. They speak to climate change. They also speak to the flooding of our traditional lands by hydroelectric energy. And what some of our tribes are drowning under. This one is called TV Indians. It's a postmodern Edward Curtis. So these speak to new ruins in our landscape, but the images on each of the TVs are what within our culture we would describe as TV Indians. So you can see how they don't look anything like we are in real life. That's Cricket, my daughter, on the far left. Ka, my stepson Santiago, and my dear friend Dina and her new baby. So I'll go quickly towards the end, but again, I'm very interested in the way our indigeneity exists today, to really shake up the viewer and let them know that Native Americans are amidst modern culture. It's a place that we're often seen, we're often not seen, we're invisible in modern culture. My images are often in color to counter the Edward Curtis image that has been kind of ingrained in everybody when they think of Native American photography. Don't get me wrong, we all love Curtis's images. The problem is that there were another 120 years where we went undocumented. And so it's really important to have more than one story for any culture. I think that there's a danger in a one-story narrative, and we need as many narratives as we can have. This one is called The Last Indian Market. This one is called Two Virgins. And this one on view is called Coyote Tales #1. And Coyote is our celebrated trickster in California lore who often shows up when questionable decisions are about to be made. He's our fabled character. I had the opportunity to photograph a celebrated lowrider in the lowrider capital of the United States, Espanola, that has this iconic Saints and Sinners sign, a sign that I love so much because we all have so many tendencies to judge each other. This is about being young, about all the hard lessons that Coyote has to teach us, and about fabled decisions about to be made. And this is one more in the Coyote series called Coyote Draws the Strings. And it's about a time in life when we're young and Coyote has much more influence over our lives than later on. Anyways, thank you so much for allowing me to come and be here with you all.